Chapter 4. Observations on the various races met with in Mecca. If, at this time, the congregation in the harem had been shaken together, well mixed, and then 100 taken out and analyzed, different nationalities would have been found in about the following proportions. Turks 6%, Arabs 15%. Hindis 20%. Malays 5%. Negroes 10%. Persians 10%. Maghribis 15%. Syrians 6%. Tartars 5%. Bedouin 3%. A nondescript rabble from China, the west coast of Africa or Russia, and wild Darwish-looking savages from God knows where, 5%. The races marked with an asterisk are mere general classifications, and might be made subject to innumerable subdivisions, as under the head of Hindi I include all the Mohammedan races of India, and under the Turks, Maghribis, and Syrians, I have allowed the Egyptians to fall. All these different nationalities brought into contrast in this way give a good opportunity of comparing them one with another, and I may here give the impressions I received, first prefacing with the following stock yarn of the Mecca Guide, one of those illustrative stories the Arabs are so fond of. It is told in justification of the bearing of Arabs and Bedouins towards foreigners at the present day, and, like so many of their stories, turns upon what may be called first original characters. A Badawi sheikh, whom we will call Sheikh Salam, and his whole establishment lived peacefully in the valley of Mecca, worshipped God, performed his prayers and ablutions 5 times daily, and was proportionably prosperous. When, in an evil hour, there came a Turkish pilgrim to his tent, Sheikh Salam, with characteristic Arab hospitality, invited the stranger to enter, gave him the best of everything to eat, and allowed him to sleep in his tent. But on Sheikh Salam's waking next morning he found that his wife had eloped with the Turk. He had just finished thanking God that matters were no worse when along came a Persian pilgrim. To him the good sheikh was even more hospitable than he had been to the Turk, and was repaid by the Persians absconding in the night with his horse, and, the story continues, the Misri * stealing his camel, the Maghribi his ass, until, what between charity and theft, he is left with nothing in the world but his little son, who falls a victim to the crime of the Sulaymani. Last of all there crawls up to him a wretched begging Hindi, to whom the good sheikh tells his tale of woe, how he has been imposed on and himself left destitute, to say nothing of his being able to assist the wayfarer. Whereupon the Hindi turned round and blackguarded the good man as none but a Hindi knows how. This is more than even long-suffering Sheikh Salam can stand, so he sallies forth and slays his reviler, and in the ragged cloth around the Hindi's loins he finds an immense treasure. Besides the touches of character, the moral of the story is obvious, and I can vouch for the facts related having apparently opened the eyes of the sheikh to a worldly wisdom which his descendants have inherited in a very marked degree. First on the list comes the Turk. He certainly appears to advantage as the most civilized, clean, and sensible of them all. Bad as he is as much superior to other Easterns as any European nation is to him. The Turks, as the ruling power, are hated and feared not only by their unwilling subjects, the natives of the Hijaz, but by all other Mohammedans, both on account of their adoption of European costume and their introduction of such Christian innovations as forks, chairs, and, it is whispered, even wine into the holy Mecca, so that none allow them to be Mohammedans more than in name. They do not hesitate to increase their unpopularity, and by a mgh-handed and bullying carriage freely expressing their contempt for their unsophisticated and more primitive co-religionists. Individually I like the Turk, he is a manly brave little fellow. I never saw a Turkish soldier with his clean fighting uniform, shaven chin, and European accoutrements, but I felt a strong impulse to go and shake hands with him. I once did in English ask a red-haired, blue-eyed sentry, "How do you like the new rifle, old man?" The Turkish troops in the Hijaz had just been supplied with the Snyder, but happily got only a vacant stare in reply. An Arab shopkeeper who professed to be up in statistics informed me that the 91 settled Turkish population numbered 5,000, which is probably near the mark. If so, more than 2/3 must belong to some branch of the military. The rest are merchants and well-to-do shopkeepers, dealing in cloth, tobacco, medicine, and European manufactures generally. This year the pilgrims from Turkey were said to be very few on account of the war, but they have never struck me as being a people likely to mortify themselves for conscience' sake to the extent of pilgrimizing much at any time, for the modern Turk shows little respect for the practice of his faith even in Mecca. I have seen a Turkish officer cut across the Qamar of the harem from gate to gate without taking his boots off, an unparalleled profanation, for which a Persian would have been mobbed and murdered on the spot. The next in importance are the Arabs, sanctified Meccans, who honor you by accepting charity. Blustering, frauds, swindlers to a man, trained from infancy to the rooking of the pilgrim pigeon, inherited for an unknown number of generations *, they are perfect in every dodge and art of crimping and cadging. I have but one good word for them: they are clever and speak any language they hear. Imagine yourself a perfect stranger in the hands of a population of Cairo dragomen and donkey boys, only doubly as obtrusive as the first, and doubly as rude and discourteous as the latter, and you would be much in the same situation as a pilgrim paying his way through Mecca. Though this description applies to the great majority of shopkeepers and lodging housekeepers, many Arabs are artisans, since most of the mechanics in Mecca are either Hindi or Arab, the best being Arab gunsmiths, tinsmiths, or carpenters, from Egypt or Syria. They seem industrious, and turn out tolerably substantial work of the elaborately ornamented and unfinished Eastern description, but preferable to the French brummagem with which the shops are stocked. Imams, muezzins, and nearly all posts of religious and civil authority from the high sherif downwards, are held by Arabs. With them, however, I had no intercourse, nor had I any anxiety to make their acquaintance. The settled Hindi population in Mecca, I was told, numbered 30,000, this may be an exaggeration, as my Arab informer would be likely to overrate the numbers to me. Coming as I did from India, still the statement is possible, the Hindi element much exceeding, perhaps even doubling, the Arab, and the pilgrims from India almost equaling in number those from all other parts of the East, except the Bedouin and Arab population of the country round, which must be almost depopulated on the day of assembling at Arafat. Many Hindis are in official employ, and hold lucrative, and a few even important, posts under the government. There are also a number of wealthy and independent Hindis permanently settled in Mecca, some from religious motives, and a few for political reasons. They occupy also the following positions: readers of the Quran, professors of the law, agents for pilgrims, shopkeepers, and tradesmen, for the wily cunning nature of the Hindi is quite able to compete with and hold its own against Arab roguery. In whatever position, they are all beggars from top to bottom, underhand, insinuating beggars. The Arab demands bakshish, the Hindi cringingly pleads for charity. They form by great numbers the poorest and most miserable class to be found in Mecca. There seems no bottom to the depths of wretchedness and misery to which the Hindi can descend and live. A good many pilgrims come from Afghanistan and enjoy a very evil repute in Mecca. They are all known by the name Sulaymani, whether true Afghans or of any of the other races inhabiting the country which is bounded by the frontiers of Persia, the Sulaymani range, the Oxus, and Baluchistan. This name Sulari R94. Mani is never uttered by an Arab unless coupled with the epithet Harami, a very comprehensive term, which, applied to the Badawi, means merely a murderer and robber, a character of which he considers himself justly proud, but applied to the Sulaymani it has a different and very much worse signification. The Malays come in great numbers, considering the long sea voyages from Java and even farther which they have to accomplish. So far as I could ascertain, the Malay permanent residents in Mecca are limited to but some half-dozen. It is known they never set out on a pilgrimage without sufficient funds to ensure their return, and it has become a byword among the Arabs that they never beg, and a common Arab expression, which may be freely translated "no humbug" in the Malay, perfectly describes them. Quiet and fairly honourable in their dealings, yet close-fisted, they may be called the Scotchmen of the East, and are the most rational of the pilgrims, the only ones who understand managing the cantankerous Bedouin. The Negro is to be found here in his proper place, an easily managed, useful worker. The Negroes are the porters, water carriers, and performers of most of the real labour in Mecca. Happy, healthy, well-fed, well-clothed, as such things go in Mecca. They are slaves, proud of their masters, in a country where the slave is honoured only after his master. Slavery in the East has an elevating influence over thousands of human beings, and but for it hundreds of thousands of souls must have passed their existence in this world as wild savages, little better than animals. It, at least, makes men of them, useful men too, sometimes even superior men. Could the Arab slave trade be carried on with safety, it might be executed more humanely, and it would, philanthropically speaking, do good to many of the human race, far above that heartlessly cruel coolie trade of India, where the ignorantly credulous natives are deluded by hopes never to be fulfilled into transportation half round the globe, to a country from which but few ever return, as they are led to believe they will by promises, a state of things compared to which Arab slave trade is humane in the extreme. I have been an overseer on a sugar plantation in the West Indies, where 300 of these coolies were employed, helpless droves of strangers in a strange land, worked in a manner killing to the feeble Hindi, for the most paltry remuneration out of which they must save enough to pay for the return passage. At the very most, 1 in 10 again saw India, and these only the shrewd, independent and clever ones, exceptional characters among the class of natives from which these coolies are drafted. It is in that country, too, where that abortive production of the real slave trade, the civilized nigger, is met, that objectionable character, the whatless Badian, might be held up in contrast to his Meccan brother, showing the nigger as he is to be found and the nigger as he ought to be. No. My cheerful, contented slave shall not be seen in such disgraceful company as that depraved shameless creature. Having been in the heart of the Arab slavery, I may, I hope, be permitted to offer my humble opinion on a rather important point, with all due deference to such of my most potent, grave, and reverend seniors, as I may have the misfortune to differ from. Are our attempts to abolish the slavery trade of Arabia likely to succeed? Are they at present producing good of any kind? To both these questions I must answer no, most emphatically, no. While every settled town under Turkish or native rule in all wide Arabia has a slave market to be stocked, our greatest efforts can but increase the demand and raise the markets. Witness, a strong male adult might be bought for *worthless Bardihan. West Indian patois. $40 for years ago in Mecca, and the same will now fetch $60. Were our cruisers doubled, the weekly landing of slaves among the creeks and reefs along the coast of the Hejaz could not be prevented. The embarking on the western shore, the crossing and disembarking on the eastern, need be but the work of 3 days under favorable circumstances, of which the Arab slaver knows well how to take advantage, as some naval men could testify, I think, if tales of more than one successful ruse told me by a Yemen Arab be true. What was before a legitimate peaceful trade has now become a dangerous adventure for the procurers of slaves, even the most unscrupulous and daring of their kind, and the ill treatment practiced on their cargoes necessarily increases with the danger of carrying them. A story told me by a Yemen Jackfutard will illustrate. A dhow in which he was serving had on board 2 Negroes, nominally slaves, who had for 5 months worked on board the dhow, and who, knowing when they were well off, would not have taken their liberty had it been offered them. She was a large Marscat Babila, bound down the Persian Gulf from Abasha to Bombay. On the day after clearing the Straits of Ormuz, in a palm, they sighted an English man-o'-war steaming towards them, as they well knew, with the intention of boarding. The 2 Negroes would have been enough to condemn their craft, which meant ruin to some and misfortune more or less to every man of the crew, so they killed them and threw them overboard. Here my informer regretted the necessity which compelled them to this, mainly because they were both very strong men and very hard to kill, blaming those shaitan English, and barging them in choice Arabic, though they did not confiscate his craft, and I have no doubt the lieutenant and interpreter found everything very satisfactory on board her half an hour after what must have been rather an exciting scene. That there are evils in Arab slavery I do not pretend to deny, though not affecting the Negro, once a slave. The exacting slave driver is a character wholly unknown in the East, and the slave is protected from the caprice of any cruel master in that he is transferable and of money value. The man who would abuse or injure his slave would maim and willfully deteriorate the value of his horse. Whatever the Arab may not know, he most assuredly knows what is to his own immediate interest better than that. And the Negro Bimarf, 99, though he possesses the moral senses in the merest rudimentary form, has the instincts of self-preservation from physical hurt most highly developed, and he may through this medium be raised from a savage, existing only for the moment, a state above which he has not capacity for if left to himself, to a profitable member of society, a strong tractable worker, the position nature seems to have made him to occupy. I know of the abuses practiced in the countries where the slaves are procured, and we must have other Livingstons ere they will cease, but one step towards the abatement of them would be the recalling of our police to our universe from those unhealthy coasts, when labor would again become almost a drug in the Arab market and the traffic assume a more moderate and less barbarous form. We are at this moment opposing the immemorial customs and religious principles of totally distinct and independent races, customs not only almost harmless to all, but actually beneficial to thousands, with a sword worthy of anti-Ent Islam itself. The only effect of this will be to produce permanently a new and horrible form of this slave trade, if it has not already done so, and the expending of thousands of pounds and hundreds of valuable lives, for a sentiment, in doing so. Let us hope that those in authority will take a reasonable view of the matter, and issue another slave circular, applicable to the peculiarities of the case, and not meet the fate of the former rapidly extinguished spark of official intelligence, or, if England must be international monitor, then, as the Negro says, if you do a ting, annex Arabia, blow up Mecca, and reform the world, but don't continue to figure a petty plundering pirate to the 180 million of its Mohammedan inhabitants. I must apologize for having been carried off into this tirade, and return calmly to the proper subject of my narrative. Besides these slaves, there are many free Negroes, laborers, and keepers of stalls in the bazaars. The attendants of the Kaaba are Negro eunuchs, whose duties are to keep order among the worshippers, serve out materials for the trimming and lighting of the lamps to the volunteers who are never wanting to perform these and other like duties. The Kaaba itself is washed out once a year by these attendants alone. They possess a kind of sanctity by virtue of their office, and carry long wands with which they make very free play among the refractory or crowding pilgrims, and are veritable jacks in office. There is also a scattering of Negro pilgrims from most Mohammedan countries. The Persians move rather under a cloud in Mecca on account of their unorthodox doctrines, keep very much to themselves, and pray together in parties. I believe they nearly all come by land, and many of them on horses which they bring with them. They are necessarily well conducted while in Mecca, and appear to be a quiet and inoffensive lot, and are as good hands at a bargain as any. There cannot be many Persian residents in Mecca, though there are a good many itinerant dealers and speculators in precious stones and hawkers of dried fruit. Maghribis are the Arabs of the whole of North Africa, a malodorous brawling horde, principally remarkable for neglect of the practices of their faith, especially ablution. The Moorish magician exists, but let us hope, for the credit of the Oriental novelist, in a very degenerate form, and a great deal of faith is placed in the charms these Maghribis profess to work, especially by the Hindis. I myself underwent an exorcism, for the curing of a large boil on my forehead, at the hands of a hoary old thief, recommended to me by the third warrior. It consisted in squeezing and stroking my head and shoulders, at the same time muttering incantations with closed eyes and many minor gesticulations, drawing mystic signs and strange devices mingled with the written names of God and Mohammed on a small piece of paper, then soaking it in a solution of common salt, so far as I could make out, with which I afterwards washed the boil, and I must record here either as a coincidence or a curious result, that the swelling certainly did subside, without breaking in about 3 days, when I was obliged to admit it cured and pay $1 as agreed. I have given the Syrians a place in the list, but they are only distinct from many others in that they come from Syria. I have not been to Damascus, but should imagine the population there must present almost as heterogeneous a collection, and as many varieties of the human race, as Mecca itself. Among the Syrians I must not omit to mention the sword sharpeners, numbers of whom are to be seen following their trade in the bazaars of Mecca during the pilgrim season. They bring their somewhat large knife-grinding machines on their backs from Syria, their only impedimenta. The Badawi in Mecca is very much out of his element. He slinks about with a hangdog, surprised look, and returns the push and curse of the Turkish soldier with a sulky scowl. The mean-spirited Bengali, who would go into a nervous paroxysm if he met the Badawi in the desert, crowds past him in the bazaar with impunity, though the Badawi is, I can assure you, a very different customer at home. Tartars and Bokharans, powerful, well-built races of very large men with Russian complexions and rosy cheeks, come the whole pilgrimage on foot from the most remote parts of Central Asia, some occupying 5 and 6 months on the journey. They perform all minor pilgrimages most assiduously, and are never to be seen riding donkeys on such occasions as other pilgrims. They go about enveloped in their thick woolen garments on the most scorching day in the desert, and are as dirty as any others, or dirtier. The last on the list are the nondescript rabble from China, the west coast of Africa or Russia, and wild Darwish savages from God knows where. The Darwishes are not to be confounded with the professional beggar or pauper pilgrims. They are bona fide religious mendicants, passing their lives in prayer and devotion, subsisting entirely on charity, and having no home. To abuse or hit one of these would be a most unholy act. They dress in as remarkable and eccentric a manner as they can, and behave outrageously, most of them affecting madness. A Negro Darwish, with his amulets of talismans and relics, and festoons of knuckle bones, stones, and rags, would fetch entire the value of his full weight in a marine store shop. All of them carry a staff, and a half-good which they thrust forward to high and low for alms, and he would be a bad Mohammedan who would refuse to give at least something, be it ever so small, to one of these when solicited. These with their companions in the list may be disposed of in 2 words, mangy mongrels. Having now reached the bottom of the scale of humanity, I will, while my hand is in, pass on to, I am afraid I cannot in justice to the brute say downwards to, a description of the remaining animal life to be found in Mecca.